Welcome to Kaizen Time, part of the Blood, Sweat, and Business podcast, where we provide constant improvement to businesses through timely, actionable financial solutions. Do you want answers to your financial questions? Email us at bsp@kaizencpas.com. I'm your host, Mark Valesky. Now let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Kaizen Time. I'm joined by Clay Hamlin, a partner here at the firm. Clay, how much do you like documentation?
Great question, Mark. Not an easy one to answer because as the CEO of our firm, I have a different role than the COO. Mm-hmm. COO is usually the lover of documentation. Mm-hmm. But I do know that documentation is what you might call a force multiplier. Let me explain what I mean by that. So let's say, for example, in the accounting world, we're working on a particular client's work, and they send us their information in a certain way. And then I either want to move that person up or they leave and now somebody else is doing that work. If they have to relearn that from scratch, like look at what's coming in, go to the previous month and try and figure out how that process worked, that's a very slow and time-consuming process to do that.
There's a lot of learning, and it's steep.
It's steep, and you may not get it right. The person may guess, because you're sort of guessing and trying to think through how this went in previous months. Mm-hmm. And now that becomes a force multiplier for the bad as opposed to a force multiplier when you have good documentation. Mm-hmm. It's a force multiplier for the transitions happen much more easily. So from a client's perspective, there are two things. It's relationship and it's accuracy and ease for them, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody's moving on, either moving up or moving out, and now somebody else is doing the work, the relationship part isn't there. So now the client's like, well, at least make this easy for me.
Right.
Well, if we can't do that either, now the question is, should that client stay with us, right? And this can be related to any sort of business. So you really want to be thinking about what things should be documented, because there's a lot of things that can be documented, and it's very time-consuming to document things. So thinking about like what things ought to be documented really is something a business owner needs to think about, and to make sure that it happens. Because it's one thing to say, hey, Mark, document what you're doing. It's another thing to actually come back a week later and say, so let me see how you've done on the documentation. Mm-hmm. Can we go through this together? Let's see what it is. Because if there's something a business owner ought to make sure that is happening, is that the right things are documented, and that if Mark leaves, can I explain this to somebody else? Control your process. There's certain things that business owners ought to control. And one of them is what things get documented. Where are these elements of control? Because documentation is a sort of control element.
I do agree. And documentation is important. I take lots of notes in every job that I do. And I think it's important that, hey, somebody gets sick, especially at a random time, right? That someone can appropriately get in.
Sure.
Yes, you should document a lot of the things you do, but specifically like working with clients, hey, this needs to get done, because the last thing you want is something to get lost.
Correct.
So Eric told me this, and it's always kind of stuck with me. He said, what gets measured gets done.
Yes.
Right? And documentation to me is part of that too, because you know what's happening, what's getting measured, what's getting done. Do you have any examples of like, hey, we document this and I feel like this is really important?
Sure. Well, there's a couple of things. Mm-hmm. We have an employee handbook. Okay. Right? So rather than every single employee coming up to me or someone on our team and saying, how do I submit for a vacation approval? Mm-hmm. Or what is our insurance coverage like? Now we have a document they can go to and say, here's what it is. And they can read it at night. They can do it whatever, and it's not something that takes like 2 or 3 people's time. Second one is for us, how our clients' work is processed every month. And that's meticulously documented because turnover is inevitable. It's going to happen at some point. And if somebody else has to go through and try and sort of backfill into how somebody else did this, how much somebody else did this work, that becomes a huge force multiplier for the negative. Also, the way our process works is when a manager meets with a client and the client and the manager agree on how the client's going to send us information. If that's not documented, then the handoff to the staff accountant goes poorly. If that's not documented and updated as you go along, when there's a new staff accountant or a new manager, how is that communication going to occur? So it can happen once when you have the initial meeting with the client. But if it's not updated, now you have either a new staff accountant or a new manager or even a new internal person at the client's office who says, hey, I'm new here. I'm going to send you over this stuff. You can say, here's what we agreed to do this. So it's hugely beneficial in multiple fronts, internally from 2 different, and then also from the client's perspective. That's super important. And then your processes and procedures. I mean, if you don't document your processes and procedures, it's kind of like the person who asks, how do I submit for a vacation accrual? Multiplied times every single person, because now all of what they're doing is not documented. If you don't have, decent documentation, to me, it's almost like, well, what doesn't need to be documented? And so I look at it and I say, well, what are we saying that we are to the marketplace, right? So, like, for example, if we say, we're going to make your life easier. So we're going to come up with a good, tight process for you to submit information to us, and then we can take that and give you good financials and give you good advice. There's always a certain amount of freedom that needs to be in there for the person to improvise, both the client and us. So there's a point where documentation becomes rigid, as opposed to getting what we said we're trying to do. And that's where the business owner needs to make a decision. Have we approached the point of being rigid? Now you have things well documented if you get to that point. But going too far can also be harmful, because now something becomes brittle, and when any slight little change happens, the business owner says, "Well, I can't really submit it to you this way." Sorry, that's our process. Okay, you've become too rigid.
It's preventing the process from occurring.
Yes.
I do actually want to ask about this, because we are talking about process. When people are leaving documentation, how helpful is it that it's all kind of the same? Like, you're all speaking the same language, so everyone understands what the other one is saying.
Yes. That's a great question. We actually have what we call our Kaizen dictionary. So we have a glossary or dictionary of terms. It's, I don't even know, 100, 150 terms.
It's all the jargon that you guys deal with, right?
Yes. So that in our internal documentation, we're all speaking the same language, and we can use shorthand to make it go faster. So I think it is super important to have that common language and reinforce that common language, because communication generally in and of itself can be difficult to, there's barriers to good communication, right? And when you have your sort of terms, common terms laid out like that, then you know that you're sort of developing a common language to make your communication more succinct. And that's really, you want it to be clear and succinct. Because again, if it's too long, it's too detailed, blah, 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 it gets harder to communicate effectively and over a whole wide range of people.
And again, when everyone's speaking the same language, it's something they all understand. And,
Yes.
And then I don't want to say everyone's interchangeable, but
They're not.
People can shift in and help out as they need to.
Correct. Yeah, that's a great point.
Anything else you want to bring up with documenting?
I think that's pretty much certainly hits the high points, no question.
I will say, just to reinforce what you're saying, is that when things are documented, it is incredibly helpful. When they aren't, it is absolutely detrimental. And it isn't until it isn't documented. So when what you need isn't there, that it becomes a huge problem, and then processes often change.
And generally extremely wasteful for time. There's nothing like wasting time trying to find something or trying to understand something you can't understand. Huge waste of time.
Especially when it could have been documented. How long does it take? Yes, 10 seconds to write something down. But at the same time, I could see other people saying, oh, well, it still took me 10 seconds to do. Hear that too.
Yep.
All right.
Good conversation. Thanks, Mark.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Clay. You've been listening to Kaizen Time, part of the Blood, Sweat, and Business podcast. If you like what you heard, subscribe and leave a 5-star review. This podcast has been brought to you by Kaizen CPAs Plus Advisors, providing advisory and accounting services to help you grow your business. Learn more at kaizencpas.com or email us at bsb@kaizencpas.com.